Welcome to the webinar, everybody. My name is Sean McGillicuddy from Tai Software, Chief Revenue Officer. Today we're talking to Mike Schember about freight claims unlocked. We're gonna go in depth on a new partnership Tai and Freight Claims have. Mike, the owner of FreightClaims.com, has created a product that is solving a big problem in the market and helping people get reimbursed for things that maybe they're losing money on. So we're going to go through that. At the end of the call, we'll take some questions. So feel free to drop questions in the chat as we kind of go through the whole through the next, through the webinar here. But we're gonna start off with I'd like to introduce a gentleman that I go way back with, Mike Schember, who is the owner of FreightClaims.com and created the product. Mike, could you give us an introduction?
Yeah. Hey, thank you very much, Sean, and I appreciate the opportunity to be on. My name is Mike Schember. I'm the founder and CEO of FreightClaims.com. I've been in the freight industry since I was 19 years old. I started as a dock worker at overnight transportation back in the day. Didn't want to be a dock worker forever, so I got into OS&D and distress freight at the local terminal level, finding shortages, applying overages to shortages, and returning distress freight back to the shipper. Really kind of piqued my interest. And then my terminal manager at the time was going to this new Yellow startup called WestX. Yellow bought a bunch of regional carriers back in the day, and they wanted a non-union regional carrier network. And that's where I first got into the freight claim piece. So I did that for several years. Then Saya came in and kind of took over WestX and those other operating companies. And then I went over to a company called USF Bestway. Managed their claims, got it down from a 7% claim ratio at the carrier level down to less than 1% in a matter of about 4 years. So just by putting in processes. But I developed FreightClaims.com because I really felt like it's the most underserved part of the industry, regardless of who you work for, whether it's a broker or a shipper. There really isn't a lot of resource for freight claim management out there. And that's what kind of spurred the idea behind this product.
Yeah, it's kind of a sleepy little spot to lose money, unfortunately, for a lot of companies, not just brokers, obviously, but it's an area where you can. I worked in insurance for a while, as you know. That's how I got my start. I was selling trucking insurance, and we represented the trucking company more so, and then going out into the market to find the best insurance programs. But in doing that, I realized that the first line of defense for an insurance company is deny. Right. And then so when you're trying to get reimbursed for something that happened, it's like and sometimes the trucking company is even like, God, just pay it. Like, this is my client. I want to take care of them. But the insurance company doesn't necessarily always have your best interest at heart. So it's a good spot. And I'll ask Marcus, you can take down the header. There we go. Just to get the screen a little bit bigger so Mike and I can have a good conversation about this. You talked a little bit about your background. You've been in the industry forever. You've actually become sort of a mentor to me because we've known each other so long now. You're kind of my go-to sometimes when I'm trying to learn a little bit more about freight brokers. But you did talk a little bit about why you decided to create the product. But can you elaborate a little bit on like just some of the problems you were seeing and what made you think that this might be a good product for the market?
Yeah, so from when I left the carrier, I did start a brokerage. So I ran a brokerage for 20 years. So I really understand, both sides of the coin as it pertains to freight claim management, and more importantly, kind of what's expected from the broker or the shipper to provide the carrier in order to successfully investigate and hopefully settle that claim on your behalf. But I always stress, the carriers are your partners too, and you really have to work with them to mitigate loss and understand the true measure of damages before you just say, a lot of the sales reps, I always like to say sales and operations can sometimes be like oil and water. And when I ran the claims department, they always called me sales prevention because they just expected me to write checks all day long. But with FreightClaims.com, we help you to understand your obligation to the carrier and the carrier's obligation to you. Through a series of email and letter templates that we provide. We also have certified freight claim people on our staff. So with the built-in chat feature in FreightClaims.com, you can ask us claim questions. We'll kind of guide you through the claim process and what you can expect by using our software. A lot of people don't understand the carrier's position, and some carriers don't understand their position. So, I've literally worked claims in the past where I knew the carrier wasn't liable for it. And I would send a letter to the carrier and say, hey, put it on your letterhead and send it back to me so I could send it to the customer so that they understand it. So it really is an efficiency tool, but more importantly, keeps you on tasks and helps you to understand what to expect through the claim processing.
Yeah. And I mean, because if I'm a broker, right, I've got customer, something gets damaged, comes to me from my customer, right? And then I've got to hopefully get the trucking company to cover it if it was their fault, right? But I would assume that a lot of times as a broker, my contingent cargo is like I'm pinging that if I get a denial right away from the trucking company's insurance, right? So I think a lot of people just don't necessarily know a ton about like how that all works. What I noticed when I was doing insurance was as soon as you get a denial or you don't necessarily know what the next step is to filing the claim or trying to follow up on the claim, you just end up like, for lack of a better way to say it, kind of giving up on it, right? Mm-hmm. And then you might be coming out of pocket. If you're a broker, you might be coming out of pocket to just keep the customer happy. You don't want to lose the customer over, something that was damaged. And a lot of people don't know that the insurance company they're not necessarily going to pay what you think it's valued at, right? They're only going to cover like I forget what the terminology is, but they're only going to cover what they deem to be the value of whatever freight was damaged, right?
Yeah, it's usually policy limits, and every carrier does have a release value, especially the LTL guys. I mean, when I was first in it, the standard release value is $25 per pound. Now it's tiered based upon freight class. So the carriers have gotten a lot more sophisticated with how they're going to handle freight claims. I mean, the reality is that, right? You can't, expect an LTL carrier to charge you $100 to move a pallet between two states and then file a $10,000 claim. Right. So they do have release values based upon that. Otherwise, to move that pallet would be $8,000, to make for any claim that might result from that. So, and that's where, I really want to stress that it is important to understand your position as a claimant and what the expectation of the carrier is. But you really do have to work with the carrier to mitigate loss as much as possible. One of the examples I can give is a term that's referred to as special or consequential damages. And the example would be, we had this recently where there were 4 drums of oil that was lost by a national recognized LTL carrier. And it brought down production at that manufacturing facility. So they file a $2 million claim for lost production. That's what's considered special damages. With freight claims, it's typically damage to the cargo itself, not any consequential damages that might result from that damaged cargo. Right. The way to hold a carrier liable for that is to have it in writing before they ship, and the carrier needs to understand what their obligation is and what they're willing to ensure, if you will, quote unquote, what responsibility would be if they didn't deliver that cargo intact. Right. But those are some of the things that, I've been doing this for a very long time, that we literally have pattern letters and emails for any type of claim that could come your way and how to respond to them, but helping you to understand, those little quirks of freight claim management.
Yeah, it's almost like the system ends up making you look like you're an expert already. Like you already know, what the next steps are, right?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because, when I worked at the carrier side, when somebody that would question us that knew about claims, you kind of take a stronger look at that claim and try to address that very quickly. You pick your battles, right? I mean, every carrier has their own process. But, one carrier I looked at that asked for me to come in and kind of help, fix their claims department. They literally had drawers full of claims that they knew that they owed, but if nobody ever called on them, they didn't pay it. So with our system, we really keep you on track with that claim, and claims will be flagged stagnant if it hasn't been addressed in a specific time frame that you set. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it makes sense. It almost kind of gamifies it a little bit, where it's like exactly what you need to follow up on, and you can hammer through a set of tasks. And because that is the thing that I think most people don't realize is if you just don't follow up or you just don't know how to navigate it, like it's really just a matter of like continuing to follow up with the correct paperwork and the correct like the time schedule of like when to follow up again, and sort of being patient, right? Because I think I lack the patience for stuff like this. If you put me in a claims job without a software to run it, I'm like, I would have a tough time like with the, just following up to get them to, it's almost like dealing with a bureaucrat, right?
Yeah, we've been hearing that word a lot lately these last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
No, very, very true. Carriers do have obligations to timelines on when to respond to a claim. There's some debate on how long you have to file a claim from the time of delivery or time of exception. And then you have the gray area of concealed damage. And that's always a touchy subject. I mean, concealed damage is just that, concealed. So, the carrier doesn't open the contents of the box to make sure it's not damaged. And they don't want you to do that at time of delivery either. On the flip side of that, if there is visible damage, it should be noted at time of delivery on the delivery document. So you can't call, 3 or 4 days later and say, hey, Mr. Carrier, you destroyed my product, because you signed that delivery receipt clear. And how do we know what those goods were subjected to after the driver drove away?
Right.
So with concealed damage, typically they'll pay 1/3 of the claim amount. So they recognize that there's 3 parties involved in handling the shipment: the shipper, the carrier, and the consignee. You can't determine where that damage occurred. Sometimes that carrier will pay 1/3, but they're not obligated to pay anything. And you literally only have 5 days from the date of delivery to report that to the carrier that you found concealed damages or shortages.
Wow. So if you miss that 5-day period, you're just out no matter what, even if it was completely their fault, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a recent claim where it's kind of tragic in a way, but driver was leaving a facility in Northern California with a truckload of computers. He was forced off the road and held at gunpoint while they stripped his trailer out.
Oh
Customer files a claim for the amount he could have sold those computer for, not the amount that he paid for. So in that situation, the carrier is only obligated to the amount that the invoice is substantiated for, not for what you could have sold it for, because you can replace it for that amount, right? But this is where I get into, having a little bit of compassion and patience with the carrier. They just sustained a terrible crime was committed against them. We've had other issues where the trailer burns down, customer replaces the product, but then expects the carrier to pay the full value of the product. You're not entitled to profit off of a carrier's misfortune. You have an obligation to mitigate that loss to the carrier.
That makes sense. I think that's, when you say it like that too, it seems fair, right? Like it's, because it is a reach to say like, well, we were going to sell these for X amount of money, but that's the language of indemnification, right? Like you're indemnified if you're sort of made whole on what it actually cost you, not like future earnings right off of the, right.
And when I was working in the claims department, I told the story on another podcast, but we had a claim for a $20,000 chandelier, and the carrier is required to put you in the position you would have occupied had that loss or damage occur. So I literally went on eBay back in the day and I found that same chandelier for $5,000. So I bought it and I sent it to the customer, and hey, I made you whole. It's not my fault you paid 15 grand more for that chandelier, but you got the same exact product. Those are some tricks of the trade. I don't know how many carriers will actually do that these days, but that was probably about 25 years ago. I did things like that to try to mitigate the loss to the carrier as much as I could. Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, that is like, you got the product. That is what they lost, right? If it's the same thing, then, I think, because we talk a lot about carrier relationships at Tai. Like our goal is keeping especially on the truckload side, obviously, but like keeping the relationships really positive with the carriers. And to your point, like, like you can't be petty about it, right? Like if you are working through it together and you're trying to be a team and you're trying to be partners on it, like you got to do what you can. And you can't ask for like an outlandish amount of money for something that like was clearly a mistake, right? Or clear, like that example you gave of somebody being held at gunpoint, like having a little empathy for that. And then, but I think the most important part of your software is like, well, just get it filed right away. Right. And then of course, then there's going to be a process, and you got to be patient with that process. And you don't want that process to cost you a bunch of money in terms of labor, right? But you do want to make sure you don't miss a beat on the follow-up, so you eventually get your money, get made whole, or if you will, on that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So with our system, our research has shown that it takes about 6 to 8 hours to process the claim from filing to finally get it settled in man hours.
Right.
We're trying down to 1 to 2 hours. Every claim, is dealt with on its own merit from the carrier's side. Some of them have some rules in there that if it's under a certain dollar amount and there's a notation on the delivery receipt, it's an auto payment. It's just not worth to investigate as something over, a couple $100. But then you do have those customers that will file $5 claims all day long. Uh-oh. Looks like, am I back? Looks like I got disconnected for a second.
No, you're here. You're clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So, the carriers also look at your claim ratio when they're talking about taking rate increases, right? So all those things come into effect, not just freight class and delivery, locations of delivery and types of deliveries. It's also a claim ratio is considered. So it really is beneficial to mitigate as much loss as you can and work with those carriers and not file those $10 claims. I mean, you're just wasting a lot of time and you're spending more money than it's worth. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. I mean, because a human being has to help do the job. You're probably going to pay them a lot more than $10 for all the points that they have to follow up on. Right.
Yeah.
I guess even before we get into like the sort of like totally what the product does, can you elaborate a little bit more on like what do you like? We got several people on the call that are tuning in, interested in this. Maybe they don't even have a clue how to handle claims or even what to do. They've been just losing money on them. They're just like, we got denied or we didn't follow up in time, so they're just losing money on them. What do you think their day-to-day on this stuff looks like? Maybe not day-to-day, but like, what do you think it looks like for them in terms of like all the pain points that happen when you're dealing with claims without a good software to manage it?
No, it's a great question. I think it's lack of knowledge, right? A lot of people don't understand, what are the documents required in order to submit a claim to a carrier, and how do I gather those documents? So our system, through a series of some email templates, we can actually receive those documents in freightclaims.com and then attach it right to that claim from the email functionality that we have built in. So we kind of guide you. We built out what we refer to as document categories or document cards that you have control over those document cards. What are the documents that are most important to you to collect for your internal process and your brokerage? But we also have some static documents that we know are required. And then in our system, as the claim starts getting populated, we're alerting you to what documents are missing and what documents you need to continue to gather. So in our system, when you file the claim with the carrier, the only real requirement is to make sure that claim form is complete. And again, we guide you through how to create that claim form and what document or what information fields are required. But we do let you submit a claim if you're missing some documentation. So I always encourage our clients that if you have a high value shortage, contact the local terminal, see if they can find it, give it a day or two, but go ahead and file that claim so even if you don't have those documents, you can submit the claim in freightclaims.com, because I think it spins up a different team on the carrier side that really tries to go find that lost freight or mitigate that very quickly. Because you do want to put a carrier on notice over especially a high value claim, because it spins up a different team of quote unquote carrier detectives that will go in and try to find that lost freight for you. System manages that whole process.
Right. And so when you say submit it through freightclaims.com, does that mean that like essentially you're helping them organize all the paperwork and then they can actually push the communication to who do they push it to? Is it to the carrier? Is it to their insurance provider? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the cool things in our system is the ability to enter one claim, but file against multiple parties. So an example be on a truckload, you're filing against the carrier and the carrier's insurance. The insurance will typically only pay less the deductible amount, but the carrier is still obligated to pay you that deductible amount. So you can manage each leg of that claim independently and then track those funds coming in by the payment source. And it really keeps you on task. So if the carrier pays their portion, you can log that payment and close that portion of the claim file while you're still working through the insurance to get that portion paid. So it's pretty cool. But right now, we are working on some API connections with LTL carriers. There isn't a lot of carriers that have a claim API. Specifically, there's not a lot of APIs that allow document upload to a carrier. It's just usually a document download. We've got a couple carriers that have agreed to workflow at a claim API with us, and we're going to work on that towards the end of this year.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they are eager to create an easier way to submit claims to them, right?
But when we approach them, the standard pushback is, we don't want to make it easy to file freight claims. And I respect that, but my pushback is, hey, claims are going to happen, and it is an extension of customer service. And they're not just using you because you're the cheapest price or you have the best transit time. It's what happens when things don't go right, and how do you respond to it?
Yeah, well, and that's the response of a real problem solver too, because it is true. Like, you don't want to get a bad reputation. Like, yeah, they damage freight and they make it impossible to pay out claims. I mean, there's some folks that's like their business model. I bought a couple of t-shirts online one time, and you could tell immediately as soon as I got them that was their MO is like oversell you on the quality, and then when you try to return it, they make it a nightmare.
Yeah.
that was based. I don't even know if I got my money back on that, but that's you don't as a carrier, you don't want to be perceived that way, right? So that is a good incentive for them to work with you on this, I'm sure. So, and there's not really another product like yours. I know that there is some competition, but you're kind of competing more with like folks that either not competing, but you're talking to folks that either have just no idea how to navigate this process, or maybe they do have somebody that's relatively organized on staff, but they're probably dealing with it in spreadsheets or, like folders on their computer, right? Is that like a fair way to assess what it looks like on their side?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started interviewing some potential clients on their current process, we realized just that. So they're using like an online document storage, email, and a spreadsheet. But that stuff requires a lot of manual upkeep, where in our system, everything is contained underneath each claim file. So one of the unique things with our system is we actually spin up an email address for every claim that gets entered into freightclaims.com. So you can use our email functionality. You don't have to go outside to use any other resource. But if you still use your Outlook or Gmail or whatever mail program you use, you can literally forward that email underneath that claim file in freightclaims.com. So some of the feedback we got from current users is, one was, we at our monthly meeting, we talk about freight claims, and he goes, we missed it 1 month, and 2 months later, we're like, whatever happened to that $10,000 claim? And they'd have to go through Outlook to figure out the last time they emailed the carrier. And it was not efficient. So with freightclaims.com, he said, in just a few clicks, I can know exactly where my status is and the last time I communicated with them. So our email functionality is very robust. You can search it. You could say, I just want to see the emails where the carrier was added or my customer was added. And it all reads like an email string that you can read through and find very quickly. Everything is self-contained.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is an area of philosophy I think our companies share in common, because as you know, Tai integrates with email so that we can receive emails from shippers, bring them into the system, build out the shipment itself, so that your day-to-day operator does not have to jump back and forth to their email, right? So it really helps with the day-to-day person, and then even communicating with the carrier through email. So this type of functionality, I think, does two things, right? So it helps the person who is actually doing the work keep it organized, keep the amount of time they have to spend really nice and tight, so they're actually being extremely efficient. Because that's how you get it from, like you said, 6 hours down to 2 hours, is you actually have to use the tool as intended, right? And allow it to do that. But the other big thing is exactly what you just said, is what our customers who actually use the email functionality really appreciate is that their management team has full visibility on when was the last time we communicated, or how often are we just not responding, or, because it happens a lot on, like, in the spot quote market. And that's where Tai talks about it most frequently, is like, don't miss a spot quote, right? Like, and your manager should be able to know exactly how, like, what's your win-loss ratio. You shouldn't have to audit your inbox to find out how many you missed, right? And that's kind of what you had just explained is like,
Yep.
if you're trying to manage one of these claims, whoever's in charge has to be able to, like, because people do what you inspect, right? Not necessarily what you expect. That's like the old phrase. So your software actually giving the manager the ability to monitor that and not have to, keep their team accountable to like getting the follow-up done, and it's almost doing some of the work. So it helps with the day-to-day, but it also gives that visibility to the management team, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But we also have a task log. So as you're creating claims or working through claims or requesting information from a carrier or a customer, you can create a task that you get a task follow-up reminder, and we have a task due or a task queue of all your tasks that are due. And then you can click right through the task and get right into the claim and take action on that. So it's pretty cool software. I mean, I wish I had it 20 years ago when I was, in the day-to-day, especially on the carrier side. And we have had some carriers approach us with helping them, spin up their own claims department too. It's not necessarily designed for a carrier use, but that's given us some ideas on how we can make the product better in the near future.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we got a lot of freight brokers on here today. That's who obviously our audience tends to be is freight brokers. I guess I'm curious, like how many brokers you think today are really like the variation between like just it's a mess, they're not following up, they're losing money versus like the percentage of them that maybe do have a decent process dialed in, but they could use something like that. How much money do you think, or how much of a mess do you think it is for a lot of brokers?
I think it's a big mess, honestly. I think it's, everybody I talk to, our majority of our customers right now are brokers. We've got about a dozen shippers on the system as well. But the standard broker, when we talk to them, is I hate claims. That's the first thing out of their mouth. And it usually falls on one or two people that don't really know a lot about it. And so we help them spin up. So in our system, when you load carriers in, we validate carriers in a carrier database so that we can create consistency behind the data that's in. But we also, with insights and reporting, we can give you insights of where those damages are occurring based upon origin, destination, down to the SKU level, and then what carrier is paying those claims so that you can make a better decision when you're selecting those carriers. So we're talking to a couple other, I can't name any names, but we're talking to a couple other software providers out there in the industry that want to connect with us. And their ask back is reflection, how many dollar amount of freight at freightclaim.com. So when you're choosing that carrier, that's just another decision point that you can make. Do I really want to tender this shipment to this $1 million shipment to this carrier that's got $15 million of open claims in freightclaims.com? With brokers, the cool thing with our system is, I may have mentioned this earlier, but is entering one claim but file against multiple parties. And I do realize that, some brokers kind of share some pricing and kind of co-broker some things, and you can keep track of that in freightclaims.com. So how many claims do I have open with broker A and carrier B versus broker B and carrier A, and keep all that separated in there, and then really kind of work that leg of that claim. One of the things with the Tai integration is the claim will be initiated in Tai. It will push automatically upload into freightclaims.com for you to manage it. And then when any status changes on that claim, it pushes back into Tai. So now you're not going to have sales reps calling you to ask you the current status of the claim. You're not going to have operations make sure that they're pinging the claims department on where they're at. They're going to see that on that shipment profile in Tai. So that time savings right there I think is massive for people.
Yeah, I mean, and anybody, I don't know if it's all Tai users on the call or for anybody else, but that is obviously our philosophy with any integration is we don't want you to have to leave Tai in order to use it. Obviously, whoever is running claims will need to be in your system, but for the folks that are managing that account and need the communication or need to be able to communicate with the most recent information, if anybody happens to call, we want that to be right in front of them. We think it's a bad thing if we've made it so that, somebody calls you and you're caught off guard. You can't see it quickly, right? There's no, yeah, exactly. So that's, but that makes sense. I think this is what's cool about this product is it's one of these things that, like you said, people are like, I hate claims. I hate doing claims, right? Like you're just hoping you don't get one, right? But that's not necessarily the best way to protect your business. You can't just hope you don't get them and then end up losing money when they, because you don't know the process, right? So I'll say this before I ask the next question. If anybody does have questions, I said it at the beginning of the call, but we've had a lot of folks trickle in. If you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. We'll get ready to move into sort of a Q&A section if anybody has any questions. But I want to ask you, Mike, like this is really, it's very niche to a certain degree, but it's also a huge opportunity for brokers to not be losing money on claims, right? So I'm sure a lot of people have never even thought about like, oh, there could be a software that could help me with this, right? Like, because everybody hates claims, everybody doesn't want to do them. So like, can you talk a little bit about just the philosophy of the business, and maybe like you have mentioned a little bit about like the direction you're heading, but like, it's a newer product. It's doing really well. It's gaining a lot of traction so far. What's the future plans for the business look like?
Yeah, a lot. And just to tag on to your point, nobody thinks about freight claims until they have one, and then they have earn. And that's what we want to create the standard for freight claim management. That's our ultimate goal. Our current system is very strong. We're getting a lot of great feedback from our users, but we do ask for user feedback. How can we make it better? What's missing? What do you want it to do? And much like I'm sure you guys do, we kind of prioritize our roadmap based upon that user feedback. But some of the ideas that we have floating ahead is, AI is all the buzz right now. We do have some AI functionality built into the system, but we're going to expand that AI functionality, through reporting and maybe even reading some contracts to when that claim comes into the system, what is that carrier's liability or release value for freight claims, and all that stuff will be at your fingertips. Our goal is to really integrate and even go directly to the shippers. I mean, the shippers, they're the ones that are directly affected by the damaged cargo. And as a broker, you really want to keep that customer happy and really administer that claim, but also give them solid facts on why that claim was not paid for the full value or what their obligation is to mitigate the loss. Another point that I would make is we had a claim one time where the guy was charging us $700 an hour in labor. And I sent him my resume. I'm like, if you're paying $700 an hour, I need a job. I'll do what I'm doing right now. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is to work with the carrier. You're not paying anybody $700 an hour. Be reasonable in your expectation with the carrier, and we can help you understand that, and more importantly, give you those facts and case laws that substantiate your position.
Yeah. So far, I got one question just about actually seeing the integration live, which I apologize, Aaron, we're not set up to do. This is more of like an education session with Mike about freight claims, which was what that's what I'm most interested in, just because he knows so much about it. But we will send out some material that shows you guys what it looks like and how to use it. I think the main thing being, if you can set up somebody who's going to be doing claims within your brokerage, they would be most likely inside of freightclaims.com mainly, right? And then everybody else is looking at. So am I explaining it correctly, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the way to create roles and provisions in freightclaims.com and do some claim. So maybe you're bringing somebody new and you want to just have them test the waters on managing freight claims. You could say, hey, set Sean up with claims for less than $500. Let's see how Sean progresses with freight claim management. And then you could change those roles and permissions around. We also have some scheduled reporting where you can send those reports out to your customers at the time frame that you specify. And the reason for that is to give you the ability to work the claim and not fielding calls for statuses. Like I said, we love salespeople to death. I mean, they generate the revenue for us, but they are the ones that lack the most knowledge when it comes to freight claims. And it's like, well, just pay it. Well, no, I'm not just going to write a check for 10 grand. You know what I mean? So with freightclaims.com, you can communicate with everybody from within the system and provide those status updates. And then again, give them the factual position on why you are going to pay it or pay it for less than the claim amount that was filed.
Yeah. Yeah, it really kind of narrows it in because I would assume a lot of brokerages have somebody in their office who has several other job functions probably handling freight claims, unless they're really large. Once you get into a larger, maybe you have somebody somewhat full time, but I would imagine that it's probably somebody in your office who has a second sort of job function to follow up on these claims and try to get them covered, right? And the product just sounds like it makes it really easy to do that. Like they don't necessarily have to be an expert.
Yeah, you're actually right. I mean, it is, in some of our clients, it is kind of a revolving door of people coming through because nobody likes it. And it's mostly because of lack of understanding. With freight claims, you're basically dealing with the problems, right? I mean, you're dealing with the mistakes that people are making. But with our system, you literally could put somebody in that seat and pick up where you left off. So everything is tracked, everything is, there's an activity log that isn't editable in any way. Everything is self-contained in there. So you can literally in just a few minutes get up to speed of where you are with that claim and pick up where that person left off.
Yeah, you end up really probably being able to measure the ROI on that person as well, right? I mean, they can actually see, you can actually see how much they've actually helped you claim, right? And hopefully maybe it reduces the amount of overall turnover because maybe the job becomes so much more smooth with the software that you get people sticking around, hopefully, like to help you out with the claims.
Yeah, that's a good. And more importantly, I mean, you're processing these things faster to keep your customer happy, right? I mean, I know some brokerages that literally have one or two customers and that's it. And they're very sensitive to when issues happen. So with our system, they're on point and able to reduce the amount of processing time to bring that claim to conclusion much faster.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in that degree, like that's how I think about it too. It's a great like customer service tool because these things are going to happen, right? It's freight, like you got to assume that some of this is going to happen, but you got to be able to communicate well with the customer and know what stage you're at. We got another question. So it looks like I'm not sure I understand the question, Mike. So like, forgive me if this one doesn't make sense, but does freightclaims.com address limited access through any tech?
I'm not sure I understand that either. So.
Sorry, Stuart. I wasn't sure how that reads into the claims.
I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, that's okay. It's okay. We're kind of getting into the wrapping up session. I actually do have a random question for you though, Mike. We're talking a lot about the LTL carriers. Would you say that that's kind of the main focus for dealing with freight claims is dealing with the LTL carriers, or is there a heavy application on the truckload side too?
No, it's mode agnostic. And specifically with truckload, that's why we built in that multi-party that you're filing against because of that example I gave. And in some of those truckload carriers, there might be two carriers involved in the length of haul. But more importantly, the insurance of that carrier. So that's why we built in the multi-party functionality, but the system is mode agnostic. So you definitely can use it for any type of freight or cargo claim that you need to handle.
Yeah, I think probably the pain points end up existing quite a bit on the LTL side, just because you're dealing with large carriers and
a
lot of red tape, right? Things like that. So, Mike, as we wrap up here, what is there anything else you want to say just as like sort of a pitch for why this would be helpful, or just tell us where folks can find you if they're interested in the product?
Yeah, certainly. Reach out to freightclaims.com. I actually bought that URL 10 years ago with the dream of making a reality, and it's coming true, which is awesome. We do offer a free trial, no obligation free trial. So go in there, add a few claims. We've got an entire team to help you understand how to use the software. And more importantly, we have a chat feature built in. So if you get stuck on a claim, you can ask us a claim question. We're not attorneys. We do have access to attorneys, but we do have certified claim specialists on our staff that can help guide you through a claim. So just visit freightclaims.com and request a demo, and we're here to help.
Great way to recover some money. I mean, freight brokers operate on a pretty thin margin. Things have to be very efficient. That's why our customers come to us, is to keep the overhead low and make sure that their margin is protected on the, when they are booking shipments with customers. But claims is another area where if you're looking to make sure you're extremely efficient, software like this seems like it could really help and recover in a lot of money. I would, you probably have stats on this. I would hate to think about how much money just gets like unclaimed, through the, through the process.
A lot of it. There really is a lot. And it's, I think the carriers, when I see carriers, it's LTLs, their goal is like 1% claim ratio. But some of these guys are at 6, 7, 8, 9%. And we're seeing theft rampant. I mean, you're hearing fraud and theft all over the industry right now. And that's, my final point is we do have a claim type of theft. And our plan with that is, as we're gathering this information, we're going to share that with the community. So of the 100 claims that were filed in freightclaims.com last week, 50 of them were theft, 20 of them were out of this location, and 10 were out of this. And then to help you make some better choices before you pick up that shipment.
That's a really good point. The locations, right? And knowing like where heavy theft happens. Well, this is awesome, Mike. Obviously, you and I have been talking about the product for going on 5 years now, back when you were getting ready to release it. So I'm really excited for this thing to be out. Again, I'll say it's a really sleepy area to make sure you're recovering money and you're not losing money, especially in an industry where things have been tough for a lot of folks and we're operating on pretty thin margins. So thank you for joining today. Freightclaims.com if you're interested in freight claims. If you're not a Tai customer and you're interested in how these products might work together or where Tai can help you, tai-software.com. And you can always visit both Mike and I on LinkedIn as well. We're both, I think, relatively active about our products on LinkedIn. So, Mike, thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You as well. Thanks, everybody.